name's Jake Riley, and for the last 15 years, the asphalt has been my second skin, the rumble of an 18-wheeler my constant lullaby. I've hauled everything from frozen beef to Christmas decorations across this country, seen sunrises that make a painter weep and sunsets that bleed across the horizon like a forgotten wound. Most of the time, it's a solitary life, just me, the big rig, and the endless ribbon of highway unwinding in front of us. And that's the way I like it. I've got my routines, my favorite truck stops with their greasy spoons and strong coffee, the radio stations that crackle in and out as I chew up the miles. You learn to live in your own head out here, to find your own kind of peace in the long stretches of nothing in between the towns. You also learn to trust your gut, that little voice in the back of your mind that whispers when something ain't right. And lately, that voice has been getting louder. The run I just picked up wasn't my usual. I mostly stick to the interstate system, the familiar routes that feel like old friends. But this dispatch, this was different. It was a high priority, time-sensitive load heading to Kingman, Arizona. Nothing too out of the ordinary there except for the route. They wanted me to take US Route 666. Now, I'm not a superstitious man. I've seen things on the road that might make some folks clutch their rosaries, but I chalk most of it up to fatigue, bad coffee, or maybe just the way the desert heat can play tricks on your eyes. But even a seasoned trucker like me knows the stories about 666. The Devil's Highway. They even went and changed the number to 191 a while back, tried to scrub away the bad mojo. But some things, they just stick. The old-timers, the ones who've been rolling since before I was even born, they still call it 666. And they mostly avoid it. Whispers of strange occurrences, phantom vehicles, stretches of road where your rig just acts wrong. Engines sputtering, lights flickering, a feeling of being watched by something unseen. I'd always dismissed it as folklore. Tall tales spun to break the monotony of the long hauls. But now, here I was, with a manifest in my hand, and the GPS stubbornly pointing me towards that very stretch of blacktop. Dispatch was insistent, said it was the most direct route, and the client was paying a premium for speed. Money talks, as they say, and while my gut was doing a little uncomfortable dance, the numbers looked good. Paid enough to maybe finally get that new set of tires I'd been putting off. So, I shrugged it off as just another job and started heading west. The first few hours were uneventful. Arizona stretched out in that stark, beautiful way it has, the red rocks standing sentinel against the clear blue sky. The sun beat down, and the air conditioning in the cab was working overtime. I had the windows down a crack, letting in the dry, hot wind, the smell of creosote and desert dust filling my nostrils. The radio played its usual mix of country and classic rock, keeping me company. As I got closer to the turnoff for 191, which everyone still knew was the old 666, a different kind of quiet settled over the landscape. The traffic thinned out. The familiar drone of other trucks faded away. It was just me and the road, and the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I pulled off the main highway onto the smaller road, the asphalt a little rougher here, the shoulders narrower. The signs still read US 191, but in my mind, and I suspected in the minds of every trucker who'd ever driven this stretch, it was still 666. The scenery started to change. The towering red rocks gave way to a more desolate landscape, scrub brush clinging stubbornly to the dry earth. The shadows grew longer as the afternoon wore on, stretching and distorting familiar shapes into something vaguely menacing. I started to notice things. A lone crow perched on a weathered fence post, its black eyes seeming to follow my truck. A tumbleweed rolling across the road, looking almost like a frantic, fleeing creature. Just little things, but they started to prickle at the back of my neck. I checked my mirrors every few minutes, a habit ingrained from years on the road. Nothing behind me but the empty stretch of highway. Ahead, the road snaked its way through the desolate landscape, disappearing over the next rise. Then I saw the sign. It was an old, faded thing, barely clinging to its post. The paint was peeling, but I could still make out the numbers underneath the newer 191, a ghostly 666 lingering like a forgotten curse. A shiver ran down my spine despite the heat. It was just a sign, I told myself, just a stupid sign. But then, things started to get weird. It began subtly. A flicker in my peripheral vision, like something moving just out of the corner of my eye. Every time I turned my head to look, there was nothing there. Just empty desert. I adjusted my mirrors, thinking maybe the sun was playing tricks on me, but the reflections showed only the endless road behind. Then the radio started acting up. I was listening to a talk show, the host's voice clear as day, when suddenly it dissolved into static, a harsh, hissing white noise that made my teeth ache. I tried switching stations, but every single one was the same. Just static. I fiddled with the antenna, checked the connections, but nothing worked. Finally, I just turned it off, the silence in the cab amplifying that uneasy feeling in my gut. A few miles later, I saw it. On the side of the road, partially hidden in the scrub brush, was an old, beat-up pickup truck. Looked like it had been there for a while. Tires were flat, windows were cracked, and the paint was faded and peeling. Nothing particularly strange about that. You see abandoned vehicles out in the desert all the time. But something about this one, it just felt wrong. As I drove past, I caught a glimpse inside. The cab was filled with dust and debris, but on the passenger seat, there was something that made my blood run cold. A child's doll, an old-fashioned rag doll with button eyes that seemed to stare blankly ahead. It was just a doll, I told myself. But in that desolate setting, it felt sinister, out of place. I pressed down on the accelerator, wanting to put some distance between me and that truck. The engine roared, and the big rig picked up speed. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and the pickup was already disappearing in the distance. Then the engine started to sputter. Just a little at first, a slight hesitation in its powerful rhythm. I frowned, checking the gauges. Everything looked normal. Fuel levels were good, temperature was fine. I chalked it up to maybe a bit of bad gas, something I'd picked up at the last fill up. But then it happened again, this time more pronounced. The engine coughed and choked, the truck losing speed. My heart started to pound in my chest. This wasn't just a little sputter. Something was wrong. I pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching under the tires. The silence that descended was even more oppressive than before. I turned off the engine, and the sudden lack of noise was almost deafening. Just the sound of the wind whistling through the dry brush. I climbed out of the cab, the heat hitting me like a wall. I walked around the truck, checking the tires, the undercarriage, looking for anything obvious. Nothing seemed out of place. I popped the hood, the heavy metal groaning in protest. I wasn't much of a mechanic, but I knew enough to check the basics. Belts looked okay, fluids seemed fine. I tried to restart the engine. It cranked and cranked, but wouldn't turn over. Just that sickening whirring sound. I tried again. Still nothing. Panic started to bubble up in my chest. I was stranded on the side of the old 6666, miles from anywhere, with no cell service. The sun was starting to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a beautiful but somehow menacing display. I sat down on the running board, trying to think. What were my options? I had a CB radio, but I hadn't heard another truck on this stretch for hours. Maybe someone would eventually come along. Maybe not. As the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, the temperature started to drop rapidly. The desert nights could get cold, and I didn't have a lot of extra layers in the cab. Then I heard it, a faint sound in the distance. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, clearer this time. The low rumble of an engine. Hope surged through me. Another truck. Maybe they could give me a tow, or at least let me use their radio. I stood up, peering down the long, dark stretch of highway. The sound grew closer, and soon I saw headlights in the distance, two bright beams cutting through the growing darkness. I started waving my arms, hoping they'd see me. As the truck approached, I could make out its shape. It was an older model, big and boxy, with a lot of chrome. It didn't look familiar, not like any of the regular haulers I usually saw on the road. It slowed down as it got closer, the air brakes hissing. It pulled up right beside my rig, the engine idling roughly. The driver's side window rolled down, and I looked inside. The man behind the wheel was unusual. He was tall and thin, with a gaunt face and eyes that seemed to glint in the dim light. He wore a worn-out denim jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, obscuring most of his face. There was something about his expression, though it wasn't friendly. More like a detached curiosity. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, like rocks grinding together. "Yeah, engine trouble," I said, relief washing over me. "Won't turn over. You think you could give me a tow to the next town?" The driver just stared at me for a long moment, his eyes unsettlingly still. The silence stretched out, broken only by the rough idling of his truck and the chirping of crickets in the desert. Finally he spoke. "This road, it's different." "Different how?" I asked, confused. "There are rules," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. Rules, I repeated. What kind of rules? He leaned closer, his eyes seeming to pierce through the darkness. You have to respect the road. You have to listen to it. Listen to it. What are you talking about? I asked, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. He ignored my question. Did you see anything unusual before your truck broke down? I thought back to the doll in the pickup truck. The feeling of being watched. The radio going silent. Just an old abandoned truck, I said, and the radio went out. The driver's eyes seemed to darken. The road doesn't like you ignoring things. It shows you things for a reason. Look, I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my patience starting to wear thin. I just need a tow. He shook his head slowly. A tow won't help you here. Then what will? I asked, my voice tinged with desperation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather, bound book. He flipped it open to a random page and held it out for me to see in the dim light spilling from his cab. The page was filled with handwritten text. The ink faded and smudged with age. I couldn't make out all the words, but one phrase jumped out at me, scrawled in large, uneven letters. Inverlope Biscay. What is this? I asked, my confusion growing. The rules, he said simply. You need to follow them if you want to make it through this road. Through? I asked. You mean to Kingman? He just gave me a cryptic look. This road, it has its own way of doing things. You broke one of the rules. Now you have to pay the price. I didn't break any rules, I insisted. I was just driving. You saw something and you ignored it, he said, his voice flat. That's the first rule. Never ignore what the road shows you. My mind raced, trying to understand what he was talking about. The doll, was that what he meant? What do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He flipped to another page in the book. It depends on what you saw. But the general rule, you have to acknowledge it. Show it respect. Respect a creepy old doll? I asked, incredulous. He just stared at me, his eyes like chips of obsidian. The road has its reasons. You need to figure them out. Then, he did something even stranger. He reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a small, tarnished silver bell. He held it out to me. Take this, he said. If things get bad, ring it 3 times. But only if you have nowhere else to turn. I hesitated, but something in his eyes told me not to argue. I reached out and took the bell, the metal cold in my hand. What happens when I ring it? I asked. Someone might hear you, he said vaguely. Or something might. He gave me another long, unsettling look, then put his truck in gear. Good luck, driver, he said, and with a rumble of his engine, he pulled away, leaving me standing alone in the darkness on the side of the Devil's Highway. His taillights disappeared around a bend, and then there was only silence again. I stared down at the silver bell in my hand. It was small and insignificant, yet it felt strangely heavy. What had I gotten myself into? What kind of road was this? And what were these strange rules the other trucker had talked about? I looked back in the direction his truck had gone, then down the long, dark stretch of highway ahead. Kingman was still miles away. I was stranded, my engine was dead, and I had a creepy silver bell and a cryptic warning from a stranger. I climbed back into the cab of my truck, the silence amplifying the growing sense of dread. I tried the ignition again, but as expected, the engine just whined uselessly. I was alone, on Route 666, and something told me my night was about to get a whole lot stranger. I looked out into the darkness, the desert stretching out like a vast, unknown entity. The wind whispered through the cracks in the windows, and for a moment, I could almost believe it was the road itself, sighing, waiting for me to figure out its rules, and I had a feeling the price for failing to do so would be far more than just a broken-down truck. This was just the beginning, the introduction. The stage was set, and I had a long, dark night ahead of me to unravel the mysteries of this cursed highway. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a feeling that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. This was a different kind of cold, the cold of fear, and I knew deep down that I hadn't seen the last of the strange things that this road had to show me. The rules had been introduced. Now, it was time to see what happened when they were broken. The air in the cab was thick with the silence that follows an unexplained encounter. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the other trucker's headlights reappearing, but the road behind remained stubbornly empty. Had I imagined the whole thing? The gaunt face, the cryptic warnings, The silver bell, it felt like something out of a fever dream. But the bell was still clutched in my hand, a cold, tangible weight that told me it was real. I decided to try the CB radio again. Maybe the weirdness had passed. I flipped the switch, and the speaker crackled to life, but instead of the usual chatter of truckers, I was met with a low, guttural moan. It sounded like an animal in pain. But there was something else to it, a human-like quality that sent a fresh wave of unease washing over me. I quickly switched channels, hoping it was just some kind of interference, but the moan followed me. It was faint, almost swallowed by the static, but it was there, persistent and chilling. I turned the radio off again, unable to bear the sound. Okay, Jake, think rationally. The engine trouble is the immediate problem. Maybe if I gave it some time to cool down, though I doubted that was the issue. It felt more like something had shut it off. Intentionally. That thought sent another shiver down my spine. I was letting this whole 666 folklore get to me. It was just a breakdown, plain and simple. I grabbed my flashlight and went back outside. The darkness was almost complete now, the only light coming from the pale glow of the stars overhead. The desert air was cold and dry, and the silence was broken only by the occasional rustle in the nearby brush. I focused my beam on the engine, checking the connections again, running my hand over the cool metal. Nothing seemed obviously wrong. I even tried banging on the starter a few times, a trick my old man had taught me years ago, but it did nothing. Frustration was starting to mix with the fear. I was stuck, miles from anywhere, with a broken truck and a growing sense that something was very, very wrong. Then I saw it, a pair of eyes, reflecting the beam of my flashlight. They were small and red, glowing in the darkness just beyond the edge of the road. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Coyote, bobcat. It was hard to tell in the dark. I kept the light trained on the eyes, but they didn't move. They just stared back at me, unblinking. There was something unnerving about their stillness, their intensity. It felt like they were watching me waiting. Slowly, cautiously, I started to move the flashlight around, trying to get a better look at the creature. But as soon as the beam moved away from the eyes, they disappeared, vanished into the darkness as if they'd never been there. I stood there for a long moment, my breath catching in my throat. What the hell was that? I decided I wasn't going to spend the night out here in the open. I climbed back into the cab, locking the doors behind me. It wasn't much protection against whatever was out there, but it was better than nothing. I tried to get some sleep, leaning back in the driver's seat, but it was impossible. Every creak of the truck, every rustle of the wind sounded like something approaching. My nerves were stretched tight, and my mind kept replaying the strange encounter with the other trucker. Never ignore what the road shows you. What had I seen? The doll? The pickup truck itself? I thought about the doll again. That blank, staring face, it had felt wrong, out of place. Maybe that was it. Maybe I was supposed to what? Acknowledge it, show respect. It sounded insane. Hours crawled by, marked only by the shifting shadows outside, and the frantic beating of my own heart. Just as the first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, I heard it again, the low rumble of an engine. This time it wasn't just one. There were multiple engines, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Headlights appeared in the distance, several of them growing steadily brighter. Relief washed over me again, stronger this time. A whole convoy, surely they could help me. I fumbled for my flashlight, ready to signal them. But as the trucks got closer, something felt off. They weren't spaced out like a normal convoy. They were bunched together, driving slowly, almost deliberately. And they were all older models, like the one the strange trucker had been driving. Big, boxy rigs with a lot of chrome. As they passed my truck, their headlights washed over my cab, illuminating the drivers behind the wheels. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Their faces were pale and gaunt, their eyes dark and hollow. They looked lifeless, empty. And every single one of them was staring straight ahead, their expressions blank, as if they were in some kind of trance. Truck after truck rolled by, an endless procession of silent, ghostly drivers. There were at least a dozen of them, maybe more. Not a single one of them looked in my direction. It was like I wasn't even there. The rumble of their engines faded into the distance, leaving me alone once more, the dawn feeling colder and more desolate than before. What had I just seen? Were those ghosts? It couldn't be. It just couldn't. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a local trucking company with a fleet of older vehicles. Maybe the drivers were just tired, heading out on an early morning run. But their vacant stares, their complete lack of acknowledgement, it felt profoundly wrong. I remembered what the strange trucker had said. This road, it's different. Yeah, different wasn't the word for it. With the first rays of sunlight, I decided I couldn't just sit here and wait. I had to do something. I grabbed my water bottle and a few granola bars, shoved the silver bell into my pocket, and started walking in the direction I had been heading. Kingman couldn't be that much further, could it? The heat started to build quickly, the sun already feeling hot on my skin. The road stretched out in front of me, endless and unforgiving. The landscape was stark and desolate, just scrub brush and rocky ground as far as I could see. I walked for what felt like hours, the silence broken only by the crunch of my boots on the gravel shoulder and the occasional buzz of a fly. My throat was getting dry, and my legs were starting to ache. Just when I was starting to think I'd never see civilization again, I spotted something in the distance. A building. It looked small and isolated, but it was something, a sign of life. As I got closer, I could make out more details. It was an old gas station, the paint faded and peeling, the pumps rusted and overgrown with weeds. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. But then I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. Leaning against one of the pumps was the same beat, up pickup truck I had seen on the side of the road yesterday. The same flat tires, the same cracked windows, and sitting on the passenger seat, staring blankly ahead, was the same creepy rag doll. My blood ran cold. This couldn't be a coincidence. How had it gotten here? I had passed this spot hours ago. Had it somehow been towed here in the night? By those ghostly truckers? I felt a strong urge to turn around and run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But curiosity, that stubborn human trait, kept me rooted to the spot. I had to know. What was the deal with this truck and this doll? Slowly, cautiously, I approached the pickup. The air around it felt heavy charged, like static electricity. I peered into the cab, my heart pounding in my chest. The doll was still there, its button eyes fixed on some unseen point in the distance. Then I noticed something else. On the dusty dashboard, right in front of the doll, was a small, folded piece of paper. I hesitated for a moment, a sense of foreboding washing over me. Should I touch it? Should I even be here? But the need to know was too strong to resist. I reached out and carefully unfolded the paper. The ink was faded, but I could still make out the words. There were only a few sentences, written in a shaky, uneven hand. He saw her. He didn't stop. Now she waits. A wave of nausea washed over me. What did it mean? He saw her. Who, the doll? Had someone been in the truck? Had they been hurt? And who was waiting? I looked back at the doll, its blank expression suddenly seeming malevolent. Was this some kind of warning? Had I seen something yesterday that I shouldn't have ignored? I thought back to when I first saw the truck. Had there been anyone inside? I couldn't remember clearly. I had just registered the doll, that unsettling presence on the passenger's seat. Suddenly, I heard a sound, a faint scraping noise coming from inside the gas station. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Was someone in there? I crept towards the open door, my senses on high alert. The inside of the station was dark and dusty, littered with debris. Shelves lined the walls, mostly empty, with a few scattered cans and boxes covered in cobwebs. The air smelled stale and musty. Then I saw it. In the back corner of the station, huddled on the floor, was a small figure, a child. My relief was immediate and overwhelming.
A survivor.
Maybe they knew what was going on. "Hey!" I called out, my voice hoarse. "Are you okay?" The figure didn't move. It remained huddled in the corner, its back to me. "Eh?" I said, stepping further into the station. "I'm here to help." "Are you hurt?" Slowly, the figure began to turn. And as it did, I felt the blood run cold in my veins. It wasn't a child. It was the doll. The same rag doll that had been in the pickup truck. Now it was sitting on the floor of the abandoned gas station, its button eyes fixed on me, and it was holding something in its lap. A small, tarnished silver bell. My breath caught in my throat. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare. The doll didn't move, didn't speak. It just sat there, staring at me, holding the bell. But somehow, I understood. This was what the other trucker had meant. I had seen something. I had ignored it. And now I had to pay attention. The scraping sound came again, louder this time. It seemed to be coming from the back room of the station. Slowly, the door creaked open, revealing a dark, shadowy space. and standing in the doorway, its form silhouetted against the dim light, was a figure. Tall and thin, with a gaunt face. The same trucker I had encountered last night. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me, his eyes glinting in the darkness. And then he pointed towards the door. I looked back at the door, and this time I noticed something I hadn't seen before. One of its button eyes was missing, and in its place was a small, dark hole. A hole that seemed to stare right into my soul. A feeling of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me. This was more than just a creepy doll. This was something else, something sinister. I finally understood. The truck hadn't just broken down, it had been stopped. Deliberately, by the road, because I had broken the first rule. I had ignored what it had shown me, and now I had a feeling I was about to learn the consequences. The trucker in the doorway started to move towards me, his footsteps echoing in the empty gas station. The doll on the floor continued to stare, the silver bell glinting in its lap. I was trapped, stranded on the devil's highway, and the rules, I was beginning to realize, were far stranger and more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The introduction was over, the game had begun, and I had a feeling it was a game I was destined to lose. The trucker moved with an unnatural slowness, each step deliberate and silent on the dusty floor. His gaunt face was shadowed, but I could still see the unsettling glint in his eyes. He seemed to glide rather than walk, an ethereal quality that sent a fresh wave of panic through me. My gaze darted between him and the doll. The doll sat motionless, its remaining button eye fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. The silver bell in its lap seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. I backed away slowly, my hands raised in a futile gesture of defense. "Stay back." I managed to croak out, my voice trembling. "I don't want any trouble." The trucker didn't respond. He just kept coming, his gaze unwavering. He reached the doll, his long, skeletal fingers gently lifting the bell from its lap. The silence in the gas station was broken only by the soft chime as the metal brushed against his skin. He held the bell out to me, his eyes seeming to bore into mine. "She wants you to have this back," he said, his gravelly voice softer now, almost mournful. I hesitated. Why would the doll want me to have the bell? It didn't make any sense. But there was something in the trucker's eyes, a strange mix of pity and warning, that made me reconsider. Slowly, I reached out and took the bell from his outstretched hand. As my fingers brushed against his, a jolt of icy coldness shot up my arm. It felt like touching death itself. The trucker nodded once, a faint, almost imperceptible movement. Then he turned and gestured towards the back room, the shadows within seeming to deepen. "She's waiting," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Who's waiting?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. He simply stepped back into the darkness, disappearing as silently as he had appeared. The door to the back room creaked shut, leaving me alone with the doll. I stared down at the silver bell in my hand. It felt colder now, heavier. What was I supposed to do? What was waiting for me in that back room? My gaze drifted back to the doll. It still sat on the floor, its button eye staring. I noticed something else now. Around its neck was a small, crudely made necklace. Dangling from the necklace was a tiny, tarnished silver locket. An inexplicable urge compelled me to look closer. I knelt down beside the doll, my heart pounding in my chest. The locket was small, no bigger than my thumbnail. It was intricately carved with what looked like a series of swirling patterns. With trembling fingers, I carefully opened the locket. Inside, nestled against the aged metal, was a tiny photograph. It was faded and cracked, but I could still make out the image. It was a picture of a young girl, no older than 7 or 8, with bright, smiling eyes and pigtails. She looked happy, innocent. A wave of sadness washed over me. Who was this girl? What did she have to do with this place, with this doll? As I looked at the photograph, I felt a sudden chill in the air, even colder than before. The temperature in the gas station seemed to have dropped several degrees in just a few seconds. My breath misted in front of me. Then I heard it, a soft, almost childlike giggle from the back room. It was a sweet sound, but in this desolate place, it was deeply unsettling. The door to the back room began to creak open again, slowly, agonizingly. My hand instinctively tightened around the silver bell. Standing in the doorway this time was not the trucker. It was the doll. It seemed to have moved on its own, impossibly. It was now standing, its rag arms hanging limply at its sides, its button eye staring straight at me. The silver locket around its neck swung gently as it moved. And then it spoke. Its voice was high and sweet, just like the giggle I had heard. but there was an underlying current of something ancient and malevolent. He didn't stop for me, it said, its voice echoing in the stillness of the gas station. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing and hearing. A talking doll. It was insane. Oh, I managed to stammer out. Who didn't stop for you? The doll took a step closer, its rag body swaying slightly. The man in the big truck, it said, its voice still sweet but now tinged with a hint of sadness. He didn't see me. He just kept going. A horrifying realization dawned on me. The note in the pickup truck, he saw her. He didn't stop. Now she waits. The doll, it wasn't just a doll. It was the spirit of the little girl in the photograph. And I had seen the truck yesterday. I had seen the doll. But I hadn't stopped. I had just kept driving. A wave of guilt washed over me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. Was this what the trucker meant by respecting what the road shows you? Was I supposed to have stopped, to have acknowledged the presence of this ghost? I didn't know, I said, my voice choked with emotion. I didn't see anyone, just the truck and the doll. The doll tilted its head, its button eye seeming to pierce right through me. You saw me, it said. You just didn't care. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. I tried to remember yesterday. Had I really not seen anything else? Just the truck. But the feeling of unease, the sense of something wrong, it had been there. And I had ignored it. What do you want? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The doll took another step closer. I want him to say he's sorry, it said. The man who didn't stop. I'm not him, I said desperately. I'm just a trucker. My name is Jake. You saw me. The doll repeated, its voice gaining a sharper edge. That's enough. Suddenly, the silver bell in my hand started to vibrate violently. It felt like it was trying to escape my grasp. The doll's button eye seemed to glow with an inner light, and its sweet giggle turned into a chilling, high-pitched shriek. The temperature in the gas station plummeted even further. I could see my breath swirling in the air. The shadows in the back room seemed to wreathe and twist. I knew I was in danger. This was more than just a ghost. This was something vengeful, something powerful. I remembered what the other trucker had said about the bell. Ring it 3 times, but only if you have nowhere else to turn. I looked at the doll, its shrieking growing louder, the gas station around us seeming to warp and distort. I had nowhere else to turn. Taking a deep breath, I raised the silver bell and rang it. The sound was clear and pure, cutting through the doll's terrifying shriek. Nothing happened. Panic surged through me. Had I misunderstood? Was the bell useless? The doll lunged at me, its small, rag hands reaching out. I instinctively stumbled backward, tripping over a pile of debris on the floor. I fell hard, the bell slipping from my grasp and skittering across the dusty floor. Before I could reach for it, the doll was on me, its weight surprisingly heavy. I could feel its cold, lifeless touch on my face. Its single button eye was inches from mine, and its shrieking was deafening. I scrambled backward, trying to get away, but the doll clung to me with surprising strength. Its small hands scrabbled at my chest, its touch sending icy tendrils of fear through me. I reached out blindly, my hand finding something on the ground, a rusty tire iron. Without thinking, I swung it, hitting the doll with a sickening thud. The doll recoiled, its shriek abruptly cut short. It fell to the floor, its rag body limp. The silver bell lay beside it, still vibrating faintly. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. Had I hurt it? Destroyed it? I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed the silver bell and ran. I burst out of the gas station and onto the deserted highway, not stopping, not looking back. The sun was fully up now, casting long, distorted shadows across the desolate landscape. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me. The image of the doll's lifeless button eye burned into my mind. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from that place. Away from the doll. Away from Route 666. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a sign in the distance. A small green highway marker. I squinted, trying to make out the numbers. Route 66. I had made it to the old mother road. Maybe I was finally safe. But even as relief washed over me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I glanced back down the long, empty stretch of 191, the old 6066. The abandoned gas station was just a small speck in the distance. But somehow I knew the doll was still there, waiting, and I had a feeling this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silver bell in my pocket felt cold against my leg. I had rung it once, and nothing had happened. Or had it? Had it somehow given me the strength to fight back, to escape. I didn't know the answers. All I knew was that I needed to keep moving. Keep going until I was far away from the Devil's Highway and its strange, terrifying rules. But a part of me wondered if I would ever truly escape the curse of Route 6066. The image of the little girl's smiling face in the locket, juxtaposed with the doll's malevolent stare, was etched into my memory. And I knew, deep down, that my encounter with the Devil's Highway was far from over. The blacktop of Route 66 felt strangely welcoming under my worn-out boots. It was familiar, a road I'd travelled countless times. Unlike the desolate stretch of 191, there were occasional cars passing by, the drivers offering quick, curious glances at the dishevelled trucker walking along the side of the road. I waved back numbly, still too shaken to try and flag anyone down for a ride just yet. I needed to put more distance between myself and that gas station, between myself and the lingering presence of that thing. As the sun climbed higher, the heat intensified, but I didn't dare stop. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of the wind sounded like the doll's chilling giggle. The silver bell in my pocket was a constant reminder of the terror I had just experienced. I clutched it tightly, its coldness a strange comfort in the sweltering heat. Hours passed in a blur of walking and anxious glances over my shoulder. The landscape slowly transitioned from barren desert to the more familiar scrubland and distant mesas that mark central Arizona. With every mile, a sliver of the fear seemed to recede, replaced by a bone, deep exhaustion and the gnawing hunger in my stomach. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw it, a small diner shimmering in the heat haze ahead. Eats. The faded sign proclaimed, a beacon of hope in the desolate landscape. I shuffled towards it, the promise of food, and maybe a phone to call for help spurring me onward. The diner was old and worn, but the air inside was cool and smelled of coffee and frying bacon, a scent that had never seemed so appealing. A few locals sat at the counter, nursing mugs of coffee and reading newspapers. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a friendly smile, pointed me to a booth in the back. I ordered a stack of pancakes and a bottomless cup of coffee, devouring the food like a starving wolf. As I ate, the normalcy of the diner slowly started to chip away at terror I had felt on Route 666. Maybe it had all been a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by fatigue and the road's sinister reputation. But the silver bell in my pocket felt very, very real. Once I had finished eating, I asked the waitress if I could use the phone. My cell still had no signal. She pointed to a payphone in the corner. I dialed the number for my company, my hands still slightly trembling. I recounted the breakdown, careful to leave out the more unbelievable parts of my experience. Dispatch was annoyed about the delay, but promised to send a tow truck out to my location on 191. I gave them the approximate coordinates, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. Soon, this would all be over. As I hung up the phone, I noticed something out the window. A familiar-looking truck was pulling into the diner's dusty parking lot. It was an older model, big and boxy, with a lot of chrome. My heart skipped a beat. It was the truck driven by the strange man who had warned me about the rules. He got out of the truck, his gaunt face even more pronounced in the daylight. He scanned the parking lot, his eyes eventually settling on the diner. He started walking towards the entrance. Panic clenched my gut. I didn't want to see him again. I didn't want to be reminded of the horrors of that road. I quickly paid my bill and slipped out the back door of the diner, hoping he hadn't seen me. I hurried away from the diner, my pace quickening with each step. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get away. I cut across the scrubland, ignoring the sharp thorns that snagged at my clothes. After a while, I glanced back. The diner was a small speck in the distance. There was no sign of the trucker. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it wasn't him after all. I kept walking, the sun beating down relentlessly. My throat was dry, and my legs were starting to ache again. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Sitting on a weathered fence post beside the road, its button eye staring blankly ahead, was the doll. My breath hitched in my throat. How had it gotten here? I had left it in the abandoned gas station miles back on Route 666. It shouldn't be here. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through my exhaustion. It was following me. It wasn't going to let me go. I started to run again, my lungs burning, my legs pumping furiously. I didn't dare look back. I could feel its presence, a cold, malevolent weight behind me. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, my body screaming in protest. I stumbled and fell to my knees, gasping for air. I looked back down the road. The door was still there, perched on the fence post, watching me. Despair washed over me. What could I do? How could I escape this thing? Then I remembered the silver bell in my pocket. The trucker had said to ring it 3 times if I had nowhere else to turn. I had rung it once in the gas station, and maybe it had helped me escape. Maybe it could help me now. With trembling hands, I pulled out the bell and rang it again. The sound echoed in the stillness of the desert. The door on the fence post didn't move. I rang it a 3rd time, the sound desperate and pleading. This time, something happened. The air around me started to shimmer and distort. The heat haze intensified, and a low, rumbling sound filled the air. It sounded like a truck engine. I looked up the road, and in the distance, I saw headlights approaching. Not the ghostly convoy from before, but a single pair of bright, modern headlights. A semi-truck. As it got closer, I could see the familiar logo on the side my company. The tow truck. Relief so profound it almost made me faint washed over me. Help had arrived. The tow truck pulled up beside me. The driver, a grizzled old mechanic named Earl, leaning out the window. "You Jake?" he asked, his voice gruff but kind. "Yes," I croaked out, my voice hoarse. "Thank God you're here." Earl helped me into the cab of the tow truck, his eyes widening slightly as he took in my disheveled appearance. "What happened to you, son? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't answer. I just pointed back down the road. There on the fence post. Earl followed my gaze. He squinted, his brow furrowed. "There's nothing there, Jake. Just an old fence post." I stared. The door was gone. The fence post was empty. Had I imagined it? Was it all just a product of my exhausted mind? Earl drove me back to my broken down rig on Route 191. As we drove, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the door reappearing, but the road behind us remained empty. We loaded my truck onto the tow truck, and as Earl secured the chains, I glanced back down the desolate stretch of highway. A shiver ran down my spine despite the warmth of the sun. We drove back towards Route 66, and as we passed the turnoff for 191, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Standing by the side of the road, just before the turn, was the strange trucker. He was watching us, his gaunt face expressionless. He raised his hand in a slow, almost respectful wave. I didn't wave back. I just stared straight ahead, a profound sense of unease settling over me. Earl dropped me off at a truck stop just outside of Kingman. I thanked him and watched as he drove away, my own rig in tow. I went inside the truck stop, ordered a strong cup of coffee, and sat down at the counter. The noise and the bustle of other truckers felt almost foreign after the eerie silence of Route 666. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver bell. It was still cold, still heavy. I looked at it for a long moment, trying to understand what had happened out there. Had it all been real? The ghostly truckers, the abandoned gas station, the possessed doll. I still didn't have any answers. But one thing was certain, I would never look at a stretch of empty highway the same way again. And I would definitely be taking a different route the next time I had a delivery heading to Kingman. As I sat there, sipping my coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had gotten off lucky. I had seen something. I had almost ignored it. But in the end, I had acknowledged it in my own terrified way. And maybe, just maybe, that had been enough to appease the spirits of the Devil's Highway. But a part of me knew that the road never truly forgets. And I couldn't help but wonder if, somewhere out there on the long, dark stretches of highway, another trucker was about to encounter the strange rules of Route 666. And I hoped, for their sake, that they would be more observant than I had been. Because on that road, ignorance wasn't bliss. It was a deadly mistake. And the price for breaking the rules was more terrifying than anything I could have ever imagined.